This is the day that has been given to us. Rather than creating it, earning it, or deserving it, we receive this day as a gift from the universe, a gift from God, a gift from life itself. As we gather today online and in person, let us receive the gift of this day and make of it a time to recommit to our highest ideals and our deepest commitments. In our freely covenanted faith of Unitarian Universalism, we know that it is the shared commitments of our covenant, not any creed or belief, that binds us together in beloved community and inspires us to faithful service. Now, let me break for a second. First, I'm Reverend Eric Poza. My pronouns are he and him. And I'll note that it has been our recent practice, and it will remain our practice, to recite together our congregational covenant. Normally we do it right now. However, this Sunday only, we're shifting when we recite it. That will come later in today's service. And next week, we'll return it to the beginning of the service. But for now, let us enter into our time of worship on this Easter Sunday and this Transgender Day of Visibility at the Birmingham Unitarian Church.
Good morning, Birmingham Unitarian Church.
Good morning.
It is good to be together again. Whether you're joining us here in the sanctuary, remotely via Zoom, or watching this recording later, it is good to connect with you. As a multi-platform church, it is important for us to build a bridge between online and in-person participants. We call this connection opportunity greeting our virtual neighbors. First, we'll project the image of folks who are currently on Zoom up here on our screen and ask them to turn their cameras on and give us a wave. Now, we who are gathered in person will turn to face the camera in the back of the sanctuary and give them a wave. If you are visiting us for the first time, welcome. We're glad you're here. If you are with us in the sanctuary, we invite you to join us after service for coffee and conversation in our social hall, which is located to the left as you exit the sanctuary. If you are with us on Zoom, we invite you to stay on the call for a virtual coffee hour immediately after service ends. Whenever and however we connect with BUC, we are building BUC. At home, on campus, in the world, every day. We are Birmingham Unitarian Church, and we are building the beloved community. Our chalice lighting is from the work by Jennifer McLaughlin, Like the First Hint of Spring. As the first hint of green begins to peek through the barren ground, as that little sprig grows into a healthy stem, as that stem grows into a stalk and forms a bud, as that bud slowly opens with each day to form a yellow daffodil, let us be like that first hint of green, renewed by the warmth of the sun's rays, and ready to emerge with a new energy, ready to face the day. We light this chalice to bring a glimmer of that warmth into our space.
Please rise in body or spirit and join in singing our first hymn of this Easter morning. It's number 61 in our gray hymnal, Lo, the Earth Awakes Again.
Awakes again,
For centuries, and even today, Easter has been an interweaving of two stories. Supplanting the spring celebrations of pre-Christian Europe, it celebrates the cyclic return of life as plants bloom once again. The other story is of resurrection from the dead, hoping for and believing in a loved one somehow living on. For those of us who do not interpret the Christian scriptures literally, this can feel like a blasé painting over of someone's grief after a loved one has died. How can we learn from this spring feast in a way that truly renews our life?
And we will be exploring that today, but first, we have something a little bit different rather than our usual time for all ages, because we continue to be a living and vibrant congregation, which means, among other things, that new people continue to join us, some as recently as last month. So let us recognize our new members today, new and returning members, in fact, since our last recognition in May 2023. Welcome them into our congregation. So will those members to be recognized please come forward and stand on the top step. I'll also invite our Director of Congregational Life, Sarah Konstantakis, to come forward. My fellow Unitarian Universalists, we welcome you this morning. Welcome you as members of our church. Our UU faith calls us to a great freedom and an equal responsibility that comes with that freedom, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth and love, and to help one another. So in joining this church, do you embrace this freedom and do you rise to this challenge? If so, please say I do.
Will all members of this congregation please rise in body or in spirit? Members of Birmingham Unitarian Church, will you welcome these good people to our congregation? And we have words for you all to say. We're eager to share our companionship and our vision, and we pledge ourselves anew to this church and to all members in freedom, love, and service.
Our Unitarian Universalist faith affirms the power of covenantal promise over that of stated creed. So now let us join together in sharing the promises that we make as fellow members of this congregation, long-term members and new members, by saying together our covenant, as it appears on the screen.
As part of this beloved BUC community, I promise to strive to be my best self in all my interactions, assume the best intentions of everyone's actions, be mindful of our shared humanity in my communications, pause, reflect, and be part of the solution when things go awry.
And at this time, as our new members return to their seats and our children and youth join their adult facilitators at the back of the sanctuary to head off to class, let us sing.
The mission of Birmingham Unitarian Church is to be a free and welcoming religious community that encourages lives of integrity, learning, service, and joy. One way we live out this mission is by giving half of our weekly offering to a nonprofit organization that shares our values and addresses needs in one of these areas: environmental action, economic justice, civic engagement, and racial justice. We support a new organization each month. Our recipient for March is Freedom House Detroit. Freedom House is a residential program that supports asylum seekers needing humanitarian protection by providing comprehensive services in an inclusive and welcoming space. The need for this service has rapidly grown as conditions worsen in some other countries and more people flee to the U.S. seeking safety, security, and freedom. Let there be an offering in support of our beloved community and organizations that build the world we dream about. This morning's offering will now be received with gratitude. Ushers, please come forward. We are a church of open minds, loving hearts, and helping hands. With gratitude, we dedicate this offering to the good works of our congregation and dedicate ourselves to its service.
We know that spiritual practices are individual but also collective. So let us take a moment as we enter into a period for spiritual practices in our worship, for sharing of joys and sorrows with one another. And I will take the opportunity to begin with one of my own. It became public last weekend, that starting on August 1st, after my very short-term ministry here at Birmingham Unitarian Church concludes, I will be serving the Unitarian Universalist Church in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. It's a suburb of Philadelphia. Oh, thank you. Thanks, kind of you. This is what we call a contract to call position. I'll definitely be with them for 3 years, and we'll discern together in the 3rd year whether or not to make this a long-term ministry. So I'm looking forward to it. We have other joys as well. Chris and Anita Stoddard note that besides celebrating the joy of Easter and spring, we joyously celebrate becoming grandparents. And we ask you to help us rejoice in the arrival of Rose Stoddard. So, welcome, Rose. And with joyful thanks, we appreciate the generosity of BUC to supply 100 toiletry kits and extra supplies to the Freedom House after our Action Sunday last weekend. Delivery took place last week from the Plate Committee. Thank you to all who were involved in that. And one additional joy, wishing a happy birthday to our Grampy, Dad, and husband, Rick Schreck. In all the sorrows and all the joys of our lives, those we express and those we have not yet shared, may we be present with one another in our beloved community of care and support.
We now take our spiritual practice to a next level of an embodied practice. If you could please either close your eyes or soften your gaze as you feel comfortable. Imagine there is a comforting stream of light coming from above you and moving through the top of your head. Feel this light that makes its way down your face, down the back of your neck. Notice it on your shoulders as it flows down your chest, arms, and torso, and gradually your legs, and all the way to your feet. Allow this light to slowly flow through your body to wherever you are holding tension. When this light finds that place of tension, imagine that it warms the tight muscles, allowing them to release. Feel the blood come back to that area of your body. Feel the warmth, the healing. Breathe slowly and deeply, feeling the relief the healing light brings.
Let us enter now into a time of deeper sharing as we prepare to hear these prayerful words by the Reverend Paul Beadle. I invite you to reach deep within, reach far beyond yourself, connect to what you know as sacred. Spirit of life and love, God known in so many ways and mystery beyond all knowing. Day in and day out, wait the worn paths, we wear some more. Pain and grief, coldness of heart, bitter and weary days where we know desolation. How do we call forth hope when our hearts buried, sunken down? How do we dig out, rise up? What balm might we take and share? Come what may, O Spirit of life, may we keep a ray of light for our inward path, a living water in the depths of us, a cleansing breath at our core. May we keep them for ourselves and to share. May we call forth from each other vitality and tenacity. May love rest in us. May justice live through us. May we have the touch to call others back to life and love, justice, and peace. May we sing back their songs and add the alleluias. Blessed may we all be. Amen. Please join me now in a moment of silence.
Our first reading this morning is from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 16, verses 1 through 8. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Salome, bought spices so they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, this is the place where they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Thus ends the original Gospel of Mark.
Sometimes mistakes are serendipitous. I made the mistake this week of not getting the title to the second reading to our tech crew so that they could have a slide for it. My apologies for you. But that afforded me the opportunity when I saw last night a different reading that had just been written yesterday to change at the last moment. For this combined celebration today of Easter and the Transgender Day of Visibility, these words by my colleague, the Reverend Gretchen Haley of Foothills Unitarian Church in Fort Collins, Colorado. When Jesus declares, even death cannot hold him back, maybe what he means to say is nothing can keep you from the life you were meant for. Closets, like tombs, are no match for the power of a person radically willing to forge their own path, to proclaim their own name, transgress norms, transfuse truths, transform the elements, and transfix the world in a story of love that transcends binaries and belief systems. Love that calls all of our stories sacred and calls us all beloved. When the crocuses find their way through the snow and the rocks, maybe what they mean to say is, we see you, transmitting light even in the darkest of days, transcribing the future on our hearts, transversing borders of gender, and transitioning this world from judgment to joy, like it's our birthright, for of course it is. For this day and this life is a gift given to us all equally, a transparent miracle, inviting us all to finally be free. So let us rejoice and give thanks. don't need something like that. It's not anything like that. But spiritually, I gotta confess that there's a part of my soul that's still stuck back from Holy Week, and especially Good Friday. When the news confronts us, excuse me a sec. When news confronts us with tragic deaths on any given week, as it did this week with the collapse of Baltimore's Francis Scott Key Bridge and the deaths of the 6 construction workers that were on it, finding our way to a sense of renewal, to a sense of revival, no matter how metaphorical it might be, that's arduous, if not infuriating. But when the week includes Good Friday, the poorly named but widely celebrated remembrance of death in our religious culture, our larger religious culture, that was just a bit too much for me, I've got to admit. And still, we face these losses. And the calendar will not be stopped. Easter is here. The day when even those of us who find no historical accuracy in Jesus' resurrection story are still called to lift up the love that we say is stronger than death. But how? How can we celebrate the renewal of life when death weighs heavy on our hearts? The best that can be offered is simply a first step, a finger pointing in the right direction. And for me, that comes through stories. Hearing the stories of those who found some renewal of life, even in the aftermath of real losses, helps me to relate to those who've faced this hard problem well, and helps me to find within myself means of renewal that I might have missed. One such story is that of a boy named Lezra. Lezra was 16 years old, and he could barely read. Working at an environmental lab in Brooklyn, he got support from an unlikely source. A group of Canadian entrepreneurs visiting the lab befriended Lezra and were drawn to his curiosity and to his potential. They made an unusual offer to his parents to let Lezra move to Canada with them, where they would give him a better shot at his education. But even though Lezra is a version of the name Lazarus, this is not his resurrection story. Rather, it's the story of how he helped raise someone else from deaths of emotion, deaths of spirit. Reuben Hurricane Carter, had been a contender for the world middleweight boxing title in 1964, but his boxing career was cut short when he was arrested for murder in Paterson, New Jersey. He chronicled what he described as his wrongful imprisonment for a crime he claimed not to have committed in his book, The 16th Round. It would become the first book Lezra Martin would ever read, and his desire to read this story pushed him to improve both his reading skills and his writing skills, for the young man eventually wrote a letter to the boxer in prison. If you've seen the movie Hurricane, based loosely on the boxer's life, you know what happened next. An ongoing correspondence led to a meeting, then a friendship between Lezra and Reuben. At one point in the film, Reuben's despair of ever being freed leads him to cut himself off from outside relationships. He became cold towards Lezra and his Canadian mentors. But the pain becomes too great to bear alone, and at one point we see in the movie him sharing that pain with Lezra and his companions, and they take the bold move of moving from Toronto to New Jersey, getting an apartment near Reuben's prison where they can continue the work of advocating for his release. And in a memorable scene, Reuben thanks Lezra for what he's done. The boxer, who you may remember was played by Denzel Washington, notes the serendipity not only of their relationship, but also of the respective biblical origins of their names. Reuben, the oldest brother of Joseph in the book of Genesis, was told by their father Jacob that he was, quote, preeminent in pride and unstable as water, unquote, and that he would not prevail. That's, for those of you who are chapter and verse people, it's Genesis 49, 3 and 4 verses. Lezra's namesake, of course, was raised from the dead. Reuben said that hatred virtually had killed and buried him within that prison, but Lezra had returned the thirst for life to him. Despite the struggles that had weighed him down for years within his cell, Reuben's life renewed. When we're faced with the tangible realities of deaths that we know are truly final, though, these metaphorical resurrections of hope, resurrection of conviction, resurrection of love, can be discussed more easily, can be discussed, but it's harder still to stay open to the possibilities of resurrection in our own lives as we live through the grief of a loved one. Yet chances for renewal find us nonetheless. Consider this story. It's by the writer John Aurelio about a member of his extended family named Emile. Aurelio had loved his relative's zest for life, and Emile worked hard to infect others with it. Gatherings at the family's lakeside cottage were interrupted daily by the energetic man rousting everyone outside at dusk to watch the sun set across the lake. Aurelio wrote, he would never let the sun go down without an audience. So Emile's sudden death just before Christmas many years ago left a significant hole in the lives of countless people, certainly including his relatives. Family gathered again in early summer at the cottage, and they were all distracted by other things until one person looked up through the window and said, "Look, everyone, it's an Emile sunset." Without another word, and with none of the cajoling that Emile had once used to move his relatives, they all dropped whatever each of them was doing and went outside to witness the sun's magnificent setting behind the lake. No one spoke, Aurelio wrote. At that moment, we all knew that Emile was actually there with us, that he was present to us because he had left us the sunset. Now, the family's loss of their brother, cousin, nephew, uncle was still real, and Emile's tomb was not emptied that day by the lake, but the family members found, reborn within themselves and amongst one another, the openness to the beauty of the setting sun that Emile had evoked in them. Although his life had come to its end months earlier, their lives renewed. And these stories speak well to the possibilities of spiritual renewal. Yet to the extent that renewal, that resurrection, can seem miraculous to us, no matter our views on the supernatural, we can see life's ability to start again in new ways. So consider one last story. A story of Mitsuo, who was like many other teenagers in Japan during World War II. This 15-year-old had been mobilized by his government into civilian service. He kept busy assisting medical personnel at a hospital. Of course, neither young Mitsuo nor anyone else that August day in the city of Hiroshima could have imagined what would happen next. Everything in the city was immediately transformed as that first atomic bomb attack in human history struck. Mitsuo described turning back toward the window a few seconds after shielding his eyes from the blast, which had been several miles away, to see the mushroom cloud rising over the suddenly barren earth, and a sky so full of debris that not a speck of blue could be seen, though the sky had been clear just seconds earlier. He did not know at the time it was an atomic bomb. Mitsuo would not learn that fact for 2 to 3 more weeks. By then, the devastation was becoming known. At least 70,000 killed instantly, and more dying daily. Only a small handful of badly damaged buildings still stood within a mile of the blast, and the long-term effects of radiation poisoning were yet to be discovered. But one long-term consequence of the bomb was widely discussed by survivors. Mitsuo heard the word quickly spreading among those who had survived the blast that no green plants whatsoever could be expected to grow in the city for at least 75 years. That would have been 2020 for those of you who want to do the math. But 1 month after the bomb, when it seemed things could not get worse, a typhoon hit Hiroshima. But there was little remaining to be damaged by the high winds. So the major effect of the storm was to bathe the city in much-needed rain. And the storm was followed by a couple weeks of good weather, so that by late September, less than 2 months after this incomprehensible destruction, 2 trees began sprouting new flower buds less than a mile from the blast site. And other plants could be seen throughout the city shooting through the rubble and the ash. For decades now, the city that was once predicted would be a barren wasteland until just a couple years ago has been a thriving metropolis almost the size of Dallas, and ground zero of the first nuclear attack in history is now the beautiful site of Hiroshima Peace Park. Even in the midst of horrendous destruction for the city of Hiroshima, life renewed. You know, we often think of Easter as telling the story of spring, of how life always returns in its inevitable cycles of life and death and rebirth, like how the wildflowers return every spring. Now, that's also a true story. That is a good story to tell at the times when the cycles of our lives are functioning more or less normally. But when we're deep in grief, the general knowledge that life always renews, like it always has, offers little comfort. When someone we know, someone we love dies, life just is not like it always is. When we experience another kind of dramatic, metaphorical death in our lives are disrupted. Everything changes, at least for a while, and the hard aftermath is that worst time to say that everything's going to be all right. Usually, eventually, things do improve, occasionally returning to normal. More often, a new normal gradually emerges. But that normality does not come quickly. And if we try to pull people back into normal life before they've spent enough time walking through that proverbial valley of the shadow, we are inviting them to denial, to dissociation, and to despair of their grief. Sometimes we have to let life break its cycles for a while. But more to the point, the Easter story actually tells a different story than spring, because at its deepest heart, Easter is not the story of predictable regularity, but of unexpected comebacks. Think of how the disciples experienced Jesus' death. No one of them expected him to come back. They had no reason to expect him to come back, except for the fact that some of the quotes attributed to Jesus said that he would, but I think anyone can be forgiven for not really believing them or even remembering them in those first couple of days. After his crucifixion, everyone had every reason to think that he was forever confined to the tomb, and the movement that had grown around him seemed destined to fail. But the story tells us something incomprehensible. He came back. Of course, it's not a historically accurate tale. It didn't actually happen. But personally, I'm convinced that that's beside the point. Because as a story, it tells a powerful message that some of those times when we know we've lost everything, the unexpected happens. Easter is the story of trees blooming 75 years earlier than imagined. It's the story of bereaved family members again finding the beauty in a sunset that their departed loved one once had helped them to see. It's the story of institutionalized prisoners again finding the will to live free. Yes, we tell of wildflowers blooming every spring, but the resurrection story is the tale of those years when wildflowers bloom after a drought, when there's good reason to think that nothing's going to grow that spring. It's the story of something returning to us when we're sure it won't. There is a generosity to life. We speak of generosity this month, but it comes on so many levels. And there is a generosity to life. And the greater theme behind the resurrection myth is that life can be generously returned to us, just as the disciples were said to experience the return of Jesus. Now, of course, no one of us can count on any particular kind of resurrection experience at any given time. For those of us who faced a loved one's death, talking of resurrection is dangerous. We have to remind ourselves that it's a metaphor, it's a myth. But if cycles of rebirth leave us cold, those misguided fundamentalists talking too literally of Jesus rising from the grave can sound like slaps to the face. Even the abstract concept of life renewing itself in the face of death can hurt, but when we hear stories of how others have faced loss, faced grief, and found renewal in their lives, we can relate to someone whose experience is like our own. And we can feel a connection, a possibility, a hope. It's true that I'm not 100% there yet, as I prepare to move to a place not all that far from Baltimore, in a few months. That's sitting heavy with me. But hearing the stories of Reuben and Lesra, the story of Emil, the story of Mitsuo, I feel a little more peaceful, a bit less unsettled, following those deaths of 6 workers in Baltimore. I can still have faith, still have trust, that we have a fighting chance at an Easter experience of renewal. Maybe not today, maybe not next week. But eventually, in the words of Paul Robeson, sorrow will one day turn to joy. Then we'll see the way forward, even as we feel the loss of those we love. The cycles of change will settle into new patterns, and life truly will renew. So may it be for us all.
And join in singing our final hymn for this Easter morning, A Promise Through the Ages Rings, number 344, in Singing the Living Tradition.
as we leave this sacred time, leave the many sacred places where we have gathered, may we carry with us the gifts of gratitude for the nurturing of our spirits and community, humility when we fall short of our highest aspirations, and resilience to strengthen our resolve. With these, may we go forth to serve this hurting world in the spirit of love. Happy Easter. Go in peace.